I've been hated for so long. Still, I endured it. Because I'm a mother. I believed it was my duty to protect my child until they were ready to leave the nest. Ah, who is this? Huh? So, on the day Brian graduated from high school, I left my family. Because I've tried so hard. No matter how much I was hated or resented, I kept telling myself that I had to protect my child because I was a mother and a wife. But those days are over now. I'm freeing myself from my family and gaining my freedom. Brian on the other end of the phone seems stunned. He must be wondering what to do now that the person who always took it is finally fighting back. But it doesn't matter anymore. Because we are not a family now. My name is Mary, a 45-year-old housewife. I live with my husband, David, and our son, Brian. Brian is 18 and about to graduate from high school this year. While this should be something to celebrate, I couldn't feel happy about it. The reason is his attitude. Hey, old hag, where's my shirt? You didn't steal it, did you? One day, as I was folding laundry in the living room, he called out to me like that. I rummaged through the basket and found his shirt, saying, "I'm sorry. Here you go." He snatched it away from me angrily. You're so slow. Can't you put my shirt in my room while I'm asleep? Don't make me waste my breath on you. I'm sorry, I just brought it in. His words were harsh and cut deep. I couldn't do anything but bow my head and apologize. Apparently satisfied, he said, "Next time you piss me off, you're out of this family," and went back to his room. His attitude started to get worse 13 years ago. He was only 5 years old then. One day, out of the blue, he started calling me old hag. That's not a nice thing to say, let's change that. I told him. But his tone only got worse day by day. Brian is a boy, he's going through a phase. I went through it too. David said when I consulted him. I thought maybe he was right, boys sometimes mimic the bad characters they see in cartoons. So, I tried to correct him occasionally without forcing it, hoping he would grow out of it. But as a result, his attitude only got worse. Eventually, calling me a old hag instead of a mom became normal, and he hurled insults more often than thanks. We could no longer have a decent conversation as a family. Time passed, and now Brian is 18. I only learned about his plans to go to college 3 days ago by overhearing a conversation between Brian and David. He never discussed his future plans with me. But he seemed to rely on David. They've always been close, and I often saw them going out together. Maybe it's easier for them as men to bond. I wanted him to treat me as family too. I wanted to live like a family. Not being able to do that weighed heavily on me, causing unbearable pain. It wasn't just Brian who treated me poorly. David also started to resent me. You're really slow. Look, there's dust gathering over there. Can't you at least clean that up? You're a housewife, after all. Since Brian's attitude began to worsen 13 years ago, David also started treating me differently. Of course, in a worse way. If I failed to do even one thing right, he'd throw harsh words at me, saying I was slow or not doing my job as a housewife. Originally, after we got married, we divided the household chores between us. Just because you're a housewife doesn't mean you have to do all the chores, he used to say. After Brian was born, I realized how hard raising a child could be. Most of the time, things didn't go as planned, and I often felt terribly depressed. At first, David was actively involved in raising Brian, but gradually he stopped, and eventually, he stopped helping with the chores too. When I sought his advice, he would listen, but it was always a veiled suggestion that I wasn't trying hard enough. So, talking to David never cleared the fog in my heart. You can't even clean properly. After all these years, you still haven't grown as a wife. Do you have no learning ability? I'm sorry. I'll try harder, please forgive me. No matter how hard you try, you keep getting scolded because nothing ever improves. His words weighed heavily on my heart. The stress of not being able to get along with Brian was immense, and realizing that even David resented me. Not seeing me as a wife or part of the family made me feel like I could collapse right there. I endured this for 13 years. No matter how much my spirit was about to break, I kept telling myself I was a mother and a wife. So, I pushed myself to do what needed to be done, even as my heart screamed that it was at its limit. Even when I was too exhausted to move, I forced myself to get up and keep going. If I hadn't done that, I surely would have ended up being unable to do anything. If I became completely incapable, I feared that they would no longer need me ever again. As I kept living this way, Brian's high school graduation day approached. However, I only learned the date 3 days before the ceremony. By the way, where did you put the suit for the ceremony? One day, while doing chores, David asked me. The graduation ceremony is soon. But I don't know the date yet. Has it been announced? To my words, he replied. Seems like he didn't tell you. He gave me a look filled with pity. He said Brian had told him the date a week ago. Once again, I was excluded. This reality was painful, but after 13 years of this daily treatment, I was used to it. Still, I couldn't quite recover and kept my head down when Brian, who was off from school that day, came out of his room. Hey, old hag, what's with this atmosphere? Don't bring your gloominess to Dad too. He glared at me. But it was his fault for creating this atmosphere. If he had just told me the date of the graduation ceremony, this wouldn't have happened. The graduation ceremony is in 3 days. You didn't tell me, did you? With a sense of accusation in my voice, I questioned Brian. He sighed loudly as if to say, what a hassle. So what? You're not coming to the graduation anyway, so you don't need to know the date. I couldn't help but tilt my head and say, huh? Why not? I never said I wouldn't go to the graduation. When I asked that, Brian. No, don't come. If you show up, it'll just be embarrassing for me. I can't stand the thought of you ruining my big day. His words made me dizzy. He had never invited me to his school events before. But if I knew the date, I would attend and celebrate his milestones. Even though I wasn't treated like family, I always did that. But this time, I wasn't even allowed to attend the graduation. His "don't come" pierced my heart. He explicitly told me I was nothing but a nuisance. I gasped at his harsh words. And at that moment, I realized that my heart had long reached its limit. So, I decided to end my role as a family member. The day of his high school graduation finally arrived. Apparently, David had been asked by him to come, and they both left the house in their suits. I was left behind. In the past, I would have been disheartened and just cried myself to sleep. But those days ended today. As soon as they left, I packed my things and left the house. I headed to my parents' home. I was certain I could no longer live as their family, so I planned to rest and prepare to sever ties with them while staying with my parents. I left a note in the house. It stated that I was considering a divorce. That I wanted to cut ties with them and live on my own. That they should discuss the details through my lawyer. Finding a reliable lawyer in 3 days was really tough. I also had many other things to do. I needed to prepare to sell the house. The house we lived in was actually given to me by my father. He was a well-known wealthy man in a certain industry and owned several vacation homes. When David and I got married, he gave us one of those homes as a wedding gift. So, the house was technically my father's, not mine or David's. Furthermore, because my father thought of my well-being and gave me the house. He quickly decided to sell it when he learned how desperate I had become, saying, well, I guess you don't need the house then. In the note, I made sure to write, the house is being sold, so take all your necessary belongings and move out within a week. My father called me kind of for giving them notice, but I couldn't risk any backlash from them later. I planned to spend some time at my parents' house, look for a new job and home, and heal the wounds caused by them. Honestly, it took a lot of courage to take these steps. Seeing my father turn red with anger and say, how dare they treat my daughter like that, gave me the strength to follow through. I realized once again how grateful I was to my father. For now, since a lot happened today, I was relaxing in the room provided by my parents when my phone rang loudly, indicating an incoming call. I had a good idea who it was, but just to be sure, I checked and saw the name Brian on the screen. He must have called about my disappearance and the note I left. Honestly, I didn't want to talk to him. After all, in the 13 years, he never called me Mom. He always called me old hag. I spent those years not being treated like family. I wasn't willing to deal with him anymore. Still, I have to settle things from the past. If I keep running away, I'll live the rest of my life feeling unsatisfied. After all the mistreatment I've endured, I need to make sure I get my revenge. Hey, old hag, where are you? Do you think you can get away with leaving such a ridiculous note? Where are you? Come back home right now. When I answered the phone, he shouted without even a greeting. His voice was filled with panic, indicating he was in a state of distress. Well, it's no wonder. After all, he came back from graduation to find that the woman he had called an old hag of 4 years was gone. And the note left behind talked about selling the house and other drastic measures. He must be furious that his big day was ruined. I couldn't help but let out a small laugh at his desperation, but he was too busy yelling to notice. To him, I replied like this. Ah, who is this? Huh? He sounded confused. Soon after, he began to laugh mockingly. What a pathetic act. Do you think you can trick me? Nice try, but an incompetent old hag like you can't pull this off. Stop pretending and get back here, you worthless piece of trash who can't even survive without relying on the family. His harsh words made me angry, but I also noticed a slight tremor in his voice. He was clearly panicking, trying to insult and manipulate me into coming back. Understanding his tactics, I decided to respond calmly and firmly. I don't have a family. Oh, I have parents and a brother, but you're not my family. What are you talking about? Dad and I are your family. Have you lost your mind? As I said, I don't have a family. No matter what he said, I continued to treat him like a stranger. Neither Brian nor David was my family anymore. If they were truly my family, they wouldn't have treated me the way they did. Family is supposed to support and help each other. When one family member is struggling, it's the duty of the others to support them. They failed in that regard. They neglected me for 13 years, treating me as if it were natural. I'm surprised I lasted those 13 years. But I did it out of a sense of duty to the child I gave birth to. Even if I am not treated as family, the fact that I gave birth to Brian does not change. The undeniable truth was that I am his biological mother. I told myself that I had to wait until he graduated from high school. Once he graduated and left the nest, it would be acceptable for me to cut ties with him. In my heart, I had a faint hope that he might change his attitude towards me by graduation. But he didn't meet that hope. Remembering his behavior 3 days before graduation made it clear. So, I decided it was fair to act accordingly. Brian was no longer my family. Therefore, I had no obligation to treat him as such. As I continued to treat him like a stranger, he finally seemed to understand my intention. Stop this ridiculous act. We're family, aren't we? We're blood related. So please, listen to me. What was that note about? Are you really going to sell the house? You can't be serious, right? We're family. We're not family. This can't be happening. He seemed worried about losing the house. But I was serious about the note I left behind. No matter how much he begged, I had no intention of changing my mind. Please, tell me this is a joke. If that house is gone, where will we live? I didn't even know it was Grandpa's house. I thought it was Dad's. I don't know what you're talking about. Please don't call me again. I maintained a cold demeanor. No matter how much they begged, I wasn't going to indulge them anymore. As I continued to act like a stranger, it seemed he reached his limit. Talk to Dad, he said, and I heard him call for David. After a moment, David came on the line. Mary? Where are you? Leaving that note. Come back home right now. His voice was filled with anger. Clearly, he couldn't forgive what I had done. When I remained silent, he continued. Enough with this disrespect. Do you think you can treat your family like this and get away with it? He said that, speaking rapidly. In the background, I could also hear Brian's voice saying, tell her more. They were angrier than I had anticipated. But that didn't matter to me anymore. Because I was no longer part of the family. Enough. I told you, I'm not your family. After 13 years of not being treated like family, I can't suddenly start acting like one. My voice came out harsher than I expected. I couldn't forgive their selfish actions. I had tried to be a family with them. But for 13 years, they never treated me as family. I was always excluded. It was so lonely and painful. How many times had I wished to be treated as family? But that wish never came true, and I couldn't give up on it either. I endured for 13 years. I tried so hard to be Brian's mother, to be part of the family. And this is the result. I let out a dry laugh at the pathetic outcome. My feelings were not respected by them. They did not accept them. No matter how much I thought of them, they never thought of me. Even when I cherished them, they never cherished me. And now, because it was inconvenient for them, they were saying we're family to try to bring me back. The sheer convenience of it made me nauseous. Why did I endure for 13 years for people like this? Even if I felt a sense of duty as a mother, it didn't justify being treated so badly. I regret not being kinder to myself. If I had been kinder to myself, would things have turned out differently? Maybe there was a future where Brian, David, and I could understand each other and be a happy family. But that's just a maybe, and such a future is impossible now. Because I no longer have any expectations for them. I can't trust them. Even if they apologized now and said they wanted to be a family, I would never take their hands and try to make it work. Enough. I'm no longer your family. We're strangers. After treating me like a stranger for 13 years. Now you want me to come back because we're family? Do you really think I'd agree to that? That's ridiculous. Words flowed out with a force I hadn't known I possessed. In the past, I would have been too afraid of causing trouble to say such things. But now, I couldn't stop the words from coming out. I don't want to hear your excuses. I can't trust anything you say anymore. I can't imagine continuing as a family. Find your lawyer and proceed our divorce. And leave the house quickly. Don't cause trouble for others. But just stop making excuses and get your things ready. Stop being so stubborn. Goodbye. I spoke rapidly, saying whatever came to mind. Even if David tried to say something, I cut him off. I didn't want to hear anything from David or Brian anymore. After saying what I needed to, I hung up the phone in the heat of the moment. He tried to say, wait, but I ignored him. After that, they kept calling me relentlessly, but I didn't answer and blocked their numbers. Then, they started calling my parents' house, but with their permission, I blocked those calls too. Finally, I was able to sever ties with the family that had made my life miserable for 13 years. Even though they tried to contact me through mutual friends, I continued to avoid them. Eventually, I finalized the divorce with David. David resisted, saying he didn't want a divorce, but once we reached mediation, he must have realized it was over and signed the divorce papers without further resistance. Since the house was technically my father's, it was sold, and they had to move out. According to a friend, after everything that happened, David and Brian began fighting constantly. David couldn't manage the household finances and fell behind on the tuition payments, causing Brian to give up the academic path he had fought for. As a result, he quit his plans to go to college and started working, while David, shocked by his own failures, quit his job and became a recluse in their rundown apartment. Even now, they are apparently looking for me, but I have no intention of ever facing them again. As for me, I found a job and moved out of my parents' house. Thanks to my previous experience as an office worker before getting married, I managed to fit in well at my new workplace. Soon after, I found a new place to live and, with deep gratitude, thanked my parents and moved out. It's an apartment not far from their house. In my new home, I am living happily. Honestly, I don't have any fond memories of having a family, so for now, I don't feel the need for one. Even alone, it's entirely possible to live well in today's world, so I plan to live a peaceful life on my own for now.